I would like to begin, as we do every day, by acknowledging and remembering why we are here today for the tragic murder of George Floyd. People across the nation and within our own community continue to come together to peacefully demonstrate and express their grief and their anger and their frustration. Wednesday night on Capitol Hill, I met with many of the demonstrators. We shared peaceful dialogue. We talked about healing, reform, and moving forward together as a community. Unfortunately, last night, that peace did not continue for the whole evening. In the wee hours of the morning, there was an issue where there were people who were throwing bottles and rocks and projectiles at officers, and we had 2 officers injured and 1 required treatment at the hospital. As I have said throughout the week, and really for my entire life, but certainly throughout the last week, we have to meet peace with peace. And last night, in the face of the rocks and bottles and projectiles, your police officers demonstrated restraint, and they didn't use any force. The community needs to know that as your police chief, I will speak out and I will condemn officers who abuse their power, and I will hold them accountable. But I will also speak up and support the officers who are doing the right thing. Officers have been working tirelessly for the last 7 days, and not just at the demonstrations. In fact, the federal task force that we're a part of made the first arrest in connection with the riot last Saturday. Task force continue to investigate all the criminal incidents that occurred that day. We're sifting through a lot of information and the tips that people are sending in and the information that we're gathering to hold people accountable who were lighting cars on fire and looting and committing property destruction and damage. You know, that's true. We're just still answering 911 calls every day to the tune of about 12 to 1,300 calls a day, helping victims and providing a high level of public safety that our community not only expects, but deserves. Additionally, as the mayor has already highlighted, today I issued the order to suspend the use of CS, or what other people may call tear gas, for crowd management purposes. After hearing concerns about the use of CS gas for crowd control purposes earlier this week, I met with my command team. We discussed and talked about future uses, and we decided that we were going to temporarily suspend the use of CS gas for 30 days. And during that 30-day time period, we've asked the accountability partners, the Office of Police Accountability Director Andrew Meyerberg, the Office of Inspector General Lisa Judge, and the Community Police Commission under Bessie Scott, along with other outside experts, to review and update the department's crowd control policies. And during that time, the Seattle Police Department SWAT team will maintain their trained ability to use CS to protect life and to end standoff situations. Any deployment must be approved by the chief or designated by the deputy chief or whoever I've designated. It is important to note that there was no incident on record since the WTO protest in 1999, when the Seattle Police Department deployed CS gas for crowd management circumstances, as we had to do on May 30th. Other options on that day for crowd control, such as blast balls and OC spray, simply were not proving effective at that time. And because of the magnitude of the event, we experienced a near depletion of its supply of those tools. Accordingly, SPD temporarily authorized the use of CS in order to prevent further destruction. Many of you saw the pictures and the photographs and the news coverage of the destruction that occurred downtown that day. The conditions that have now been met, and we have our resources back in place, and that authorization has been rescinded. SPD remains committed to the mission of managing demonstrations and managing events where no crowd control tools need to be used. But we also must protect the life and the property of this great city. Thank you.